At 3:17.
Wow.
Korea Standard Time this morning, a North Korean patrol vessel crossed into disputed waters in the Yellow Sea, transmitting a navigation warning that claims sovereignty over an area Japan has contested for 6 decades. What happened in the following 47 minutes would expose the fragility of regional security architecture in Northeast Asia and demonstrate that decades of diplomatic ambiguity can collapse in less than an hour when miscalculation meets military capability. The vessel in question, a Wonsan-class coastal patrol craft designated KPN-383 by South Korean Naval Intelligence, departed Nampo Harbor at 1:23
Wow.
and proceeded southwest at 18 knots toward coordinates that place it directly in the overlapping exclusive economic zones claimed by both North Korea and Japan. The vessel carried a crew of 24, mounted a 25mm autocannon, and possessed neither the range nor the capability to threaten major Japanese installations. That detail matters because what North Korea lacked in military capacity, it attempted to compensate for through escalatory signaling, and that calculation would prove catastrophically wrong. This is not the first time North Korean vessels have probed these waters. Maritime boundary disputes in the Yellow Sea have generated periodic confrontations since the 1960s, with fishing vessel incidents, navigation warnings, and occasional close encounters between patrol craft, creating a persistent low-level tension that normally resolves through diplomatic channels and tactical de-escalation. What makes this morning's incident fundamentally different is timing, context, and the nature of Japan's response, which signals a strategic recalculation that has implications extending far beyond one patrol boat in contested waters. To understand why this matters, you need to grasp 3 converging realities that transformed routine provocation into potential flashpoint. First, Japan deployed the JS Haguro, an Aegis-equipped Maya-class destroyer, to the Yellow Sea just 72 hours ago in what Tokyo described as freedom of navigation operations, but Pyongyang interpreted as deliberate encroachment. Second, North Korea conducted its 7th missile test of the month yesterday, launching a short-range ballistic missile that traveled 280 kilometers before splashing down in waters Japan claims as its exclusive economic zone. Third, the United States repositioned naval assets away from the Korean peninsula toward the South China Sea 96 hours ago, creating a temporary capability gap that Pyongyang apparently assessed as an opportunity window. Subscribe to Dr. Elena Harris right now and hit that notification bell, because what you are about to hear reveals decision-making patterns that could define regional security dynamics for the next decade, and you cannot afford to miss the analysis of what happened next. The North Korean vessel transmitted its navigation warning at 3:17
Wow.
claiming a 50 nautical mile radius around its position as territorial waters under North Korean sovereignty. This claim has no basis in international maritime law, contradicts North Korea's own previously stated positions on maritime boundaries, and represents an escalation in rhetorical positioning that defense analysts watching this crisis recognize as testing language designed to probe Japanese response thresholds. The transmission specified that any vessels entering the claimed zone would be regarded as hostile and subject to defensive measures, language that carries implicit threat of military action. The JS Haguro detected the transmission immediately. At 3:19,
Wow.
the destroyer's AN-SPI-7 radar system, one of the most advanced air and missile defense systems currently deployed anywhere in the world, locked onto KPN-383 at a range of 87 nautical miles. The radar system can track more than 1,000 targets simultaneously, discriminate between actual threats and decoys, and provide fire control data to missile systems with millisecond precision. For the North Korean patrol craft, this meant that from the moment it transmitted its navigation warning, it was being tracked with a level of precision that allowed the Japanese destroyer to know its exact position, heading, speed, and tactical profile in real time. What happened at 3:24
Wow.
represents the inflection point where this incident shifted from routine provocation to something qualitatively different. The JS Haguro did not respond through diplomatic channels, did not request instructions from higher authority, did not attempt de-escalatory communication. Instead, the destroyer changed course, increased speed to 28 knots, and proceeded directly toward the North Korean vessel, on an intercept heading calculated to bring the 2 ships within visual range in approximately 35 minutes. This decision, made at the tactical commander level aboard the Haguro, reflects new rules of engagement that Japanese maritime self-defense forces implemented following a classified strategic review completed just 2 weeks ago. The The strategic review conducted by Japan's National Security Council, in coordination with the Ministry of Defense, concluded that decades of restrained response to North Korean provocations had created a perception of Japanese passivity that encouraged continued testing. The review recommended what defense planners describe as credible forward defense, a doctrine that authorizes tactical commanders to respond immediately to sovereignty violations without awaiting political authorization, provided the response remains proportional and defensible under international law. The Haguro's commanding officer, Captain Takeshi Yamamoto, a 23-year naval veteran with extensive experience in tense maritime encounters, made the decision to intercept based on these new authorities. North Korea detected the course change at 3:26 a.m. The patrol vessel immediately reduced speed and transmitted a second navigation warning, this time specifically naming the JS Haguro and demanding it maintain minimum distance of 12 nautical miles. This distance demand reveals North Korea's legal positioning, as 12 nautical miles represents the standard territorial sea boundary under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. By demanding this distance, Pyongyang was asserting that its patrol vessel operated in sovereign territorial waters, a claim that Japan rejects and that most legal scholars consider without merit in these specific coordinates. The Haguro did not acknowledge the transmission. The destroyer maintained its intercept heading and at 3:31 a.m. And Captain Yamamoto transmitted a message through secure channels to Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force headquarters in Yokosuka. The message, according to sources familiar with the communication, reported the situation, described intended actions, and requested any modification to standing orders. The headquarters response arrived at 3:34 a.m. with a single directive: proceed as authorized under current rules of engagement. This exchange is significant because it demonstrates that the tactical response was occurring with full awareness and authorization from Japanese military command, transforming what might appear as individual commander initiative into coordinated national policy implementation. At 3:42 a.m. And with the two vessels now 23 nautical miles apart, the North Korean patrol craft made what defense analysts recognize as either a catastrophic miscalculation or a deliberate escalation designed to force Japanese backing down. The vessel activated its fire control radar, locking onto the approaching destroyer. This action, in naval warfare protocols, represents hostile intent. Fire control radar activation means weapon systems are being prepared for potential engagement, and it crosses the threshold from posturing into active threat. The JS Haguro's defensive systems detected the radar lock immediately. Automatic countermeasures activated, electronic warfare systems began jamming the North Korean radar, and the destroyer's own fire control systems achieved weapons-ready status in 7 seconds. The ship carries 64 MiG-41 vertical launch system cells loaded with SM-3 Block 2IA interceptors for ballistic missile defense, SM-6 dual-role missiles capable of engaging both aircraft and surface targets, and Type 07 vertical launch anti-submarine rockets. Against a single patrol craft armed with a 25mm gun, the Haguro possessed overwhelming firepower advantage that could eliminate the threat in seconds. But the rules of engagement specified proportional response, and what happened next demonstrated the sophisticated calibration of Japan's new maritime doctrine. At 3:43 a.m., Captain Yamamoto authorized what naval forces describe as a show of capability demonstration. The Haguro launched a single SM-6 missile on a ballistic trajectory that would pass within 500 meters of the North Korean vessel before self-destructing at safe altitude. The missile, traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 3.5, was visible to the North Korean crew for approximately 8 seconds before detonating in a controlled explosion that created a pressure wave felt aboard their vessel but caused no damage. This demonstration achieved multiple objectives simultaneously. It proved the destroyer possessed lethal capability, it demonstrated precision and control, and it communicated unmistakably that further escalation would produce consequences the patrol craft could not survive. The North Korean response was immediate. At 3:44 a.m., a KPN-383 deactivated its fire control radar, reversed course, and began proceeding northeast toward North Korean territorial waters at maximum speed. The vessel transmitted no further navigation warnings, made no additional territorial claims, and maintained radio silence throughout its withdrawal. The patrol craft returned to Nampo Harbor at 5:17 a.m. And North Korean state media has made no mention of the incident in the 18 hours since it concluded. But here is where this incident becomes truly extraordinary, and why you need to understand the broader strategic context that transformed a single patrol boat encounter into a potential watershed moment for Northeast Asian security dynamics. The JS Haguro did not pursue the withdrawing vessel, did not claim victory, did not publicly acknowledge the incident. Instead, the destroyer remained on station in the disputed waters, continuing its patrol pattern and demonstrating that Japan now intends to maintain persistent presence in areas North Korea has attempted to claim as exclusive zones. This continued presence represents the operational implementation of credible forward defense, and it signals that Japan's previous pattern of withdrawing after confrontations to de-escalate tensions has ended. Make sure you are subscribed and notifications are turned on, because this story is moving faster than any news cycle can track. And what happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether this incident represents isolated tactical engagement or the beginning of sustained Japanese strategic repositioning in Northeast Asian waters. The economic dimensions of this confrontation extend far beyond military calculations. The Yellow Sea contains fishing grounds that provide approximately 340,000 metric tons of annual catch valued at $1. $2 billion, supporting coastal communities in North Korea, South Korea, China, and Japan. These waters also overlay potential underwater resources, including natural gas deposits, that geological surveys estimate could contain 8 trillion cubic feet of recoverable reserves. Maritime boundary disputes in this region are not abstract sovereignty questions, but contests over economic resources that nations depend on for food security and energy development. North Korea's economy, already strained by international sanctions and domestic mismanagement, derives approximately $140 million annually from fishing operations in waters it claims in the Yellow Sea. The fishing fleet represents one of the few remaining hard currency generators available to the regime, with catches sold to Chinese processors and wholesalers who export to international markets. Any Japanese assertion of enhanced control over these waters threatens this revenue stream, creating economic pressure that compounds the regime's existing financial stress. For Japan, the strategic calculation extends beyond immediate maritime boundaries to broader questions about deterrence credibility and alliance relationships. Tokyo has observed with concern the effectiveness of Chinese gray zone operations in the East and South China Seas, where persistent low-level challenges to existing territorial arrangements have gradually shifted possession and control without triggering major military responses. Japanese defense planners determined that allowing similar patterns to develop in waters claimed by North Korea would encourage Chinese assertiveness, undermine American commitment to mutual defense treaties, and demonstrate weakness that invites exploitation. The timing of this incident, occurring during a temporary reduction in U.S. naval presence near the Korean peninsula, was almost certainly not coincidental. North Korea maintains sophisticated surveillance capabilities that track American naval movements, and Pyongyang has historically demonstrated skill at identifying and exploiting perceived capability gaps. The decision to probe Japanese resolve during a window when American carrier strike groups were repositioned south suggests North Korean planners believed Japan might prove reluctant to respond decisively without immediate American support available. That calculation proved wrong, and the miscalculation reveals important information about both North Korean strategic assessment processes and Japanese decision-making authority. The fact that Captain Yamamoto possessed authorization to engage without waiting for American coordination demonstrates that Japan has moved toward operational independence in defending claimed maritime zones, reducing reliance on alliance structures that might introduce delays during fast-moving tactical encounters. This operational independence reflects years of quiet Japanese military modernization that has produced capabilities approaching parity with any regional adversary except China in specific domains. The JS Haguro itself represents this modernization trajectory. The Maya-class destroyer is one of the most capable surface combatants afloat anywhere in the world, with Aegis Baseline 9 combat systems, cooperative engagement capability that allows it to share targeting data with other platforms in real time, and integrated air and missile defense systems that can simultaneously engage aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. The ship costs $1. $7 billion to construct, carries a crew of 310, and possesses the capability to defend not just itself, but entire fleet formations against coordinated saturation attacks. Deploying such a valuable asset into contested Yellow Sea waters signals that Japan views these areas as worth defending with premier capabilities rather than secondary platforms. The missile demonstration at 343A this morning revealed another critical dimension of Japanese capability that North Korea may not have fully appreciated. The SM-6 missile employed in the show of force demonstration is a dual-role weapon capable of engaging both air threats and surface targets at ranges exceeding 150 nautical miles. This versatility means the Haguro could engage North Korean patrol craft far beyond the range at which those vessels could threaten the destroyer, creating a standoff capability that renders small patrol craft essentially helpless against Japanese destroyers. The precision required to place a missile 500 meters from a moving target without causing damage demonstrates fire control accuracy that North Korean planners must now factor into future operational calculations. But the most significant aspect of this encounter may be what did not happen. China, which maintains extensive interests in Yellow Sea maritime boundaries and typically responds vocally to any perceived threat to regional stability, has remained publicly silent about the incident. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokespeople, who normally issue statements within hours of any maritime confrontation involving regional powers, have made no comment even when directly questioned about the encounter during regularly scheduled press briefings. This silence is deafening, and it suggests Beijing may have concluded that North Korea's provocation was unjustified and Japan's response proportional, declining to provide diplomatic cover for Pyongyang's miscalculation. Chinese calculations about this incident likely factor in several competing considerations. Beijing maintains a formal alliance with North Korea through the 1961 Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance, which technically obligates China to provide military support if North Korea faces armed attack. However, Chinese officials have increasingly signaled frustration with North Korean provocations that create instability China did not authorize and that complicate Chinese diplomatic positioning with regional neighbors. The decision to remain silent about this morning's encounter suggests China views it as a North Korean provocation that backfired rather than as Japanese aggression requiring Chinese response. This Chinese silence matters enormously for future North Korean calculations about acceptable risk levels in maritime confrontations. If Pyongyang cannot rely on Chinese diplomatic support when its provocations generate armed responses, the regime faces much higher costs for future testing behavior. North Korea has historically operated under the assumption that China would provide at minimum rhetorical support and at maximum direct military assistance in any confrontation with Japan or the United States. If that assumption no longer holds, North Korea's strategic position deteriorates significantly, potentially constraining future provocations. The incident also illuminates the complex three-way dynamic among North Korea, Japan, and South Korea in maritime domains. South Korea maintains its own territorial disputes with both North Korea and Japan in these waters, complicating any unified response to North Korean provocations. Seoul's official statement about this morning's incident, issued at 11:47 a.m. local time, called for all parties to exercise restraint and respect existing maritime boundaries, language that carefully avoids endorsing either North Korea's territorial claims or Japan's intervention. This studied neutrality reflects South Korea's difficult position, where supporting Japan too explicitly strains inter-Korean relations, while failing to push back against North Korean provocations encourages additional testing. From a broader strategic perspective, this incident occurs against a backdrop of accelerating Japanese military normalization that has been developing for over a decade, but accelerated dramatically in the past 18 months. Japan's 2022 National Security Strategy designated China as the greatest strategic challenge and identified North Korea as a serious and imminent threat, language that reflected fundamental reassessment of Japan's security environment. The strategy authorized development of counter-strike capabilities, increased defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027, and expanded operational authorities for self-defense force commanders. The spending increases translate into concrete capabilities. Japan's defense budget for fiscal year 2024 totals 56.9 billion, representing a 16.5% increase from the previous year, and funding acquisition of Tomahawk cruise missiles, expanded missile defense systems, enhanced cyber warfare capabilities, and additional Aegis destroyers. This sustained investment has transformed Japan's self-defense forces from a constitutionally constrained military focus primarily on homeland defense into an increasingly capable expeditionary force with regional power projection capabilities. The constitutional constraints that historically limited Japanese military operations have been progressively reinterpreted through what legal scholars describe as creative interpretation rather than formal amendment. The 2015 reinterpretation allowing collective self-defense expanded scenarios under which Japanese forces could engage in combat operations. The 2022 counterstrike authorization permits preemptive strikes against adversary missile launch facilities if attack is deemed imminent. These reinterpretations have occurred through cabinet decisions and legislative action rather than constitutional amendment, allowing Japan to expand military options while avoiding the politically difficult process of formally revising Article 9 of the Constitution. This morning's incident demonstrates these expanded authorities in operational practice. The decision by Captain Yamamoto to intercept the North Korean vessel, conduct a show of force demonstration, and maintain presence in contested waters would have been legally questionable and politically impossible under Japan's security framework from even 5 years ago. The fact that such actions now occur with full authorization from military and political leadership shows how far Japanese security policy has evolved. The regional implications extend well beyond North Korean maritime provocations. China has observed this incident closely, and Beijing's analysis almost certainly includes assessment of what Japanese responses to Chinese maritime activities might look like under these new rules of engagement. If Japan demonstrates willingness to conduct forceful responses to North Korean vessels in contested waters, Chinese planners must consider whether similar responses might greet Chinese Coast Guard operations around the Senkaku Islands or Chinese naval patrols in waters Japan claims as exclusive economic zones.